Hi, so welcome back to The Active Listener. My name is Mark Julian, and this is a place where we listen, not just hear. Particularly excited today because I've got a friend of mine named Maria. Welcome, Maria.
Hi, Mark. Nice
Hi.
to speaking to you today.
It's good to speak to you too. So before we move on and talk about your subject, which I understand is going to be about failure, tell us a little bit about yourself.
So, Mark, I'm currently the head of health, safety, and well-being in Cambridge University Prison Assessment. As you know, I have been working as health safety professional for many years now, for over 20 years. Uh, my career started mainly in industry, so chemical engineering, safety, and it has shifted towards more the people side of health and safety, so the behavior of health and safety, building a culture where health and safety is spoken about. So I'm very excited to be talking about something that I think impacts behavior a lot, which is how we approach failure, how we see failure, and not just as an individual level, but as an organization. So looking forward to talk about it.
Me too. And I think you're right. It's a really big topic, and often I think really associated with negativity. And it's certainly something that will come up in coaching conversations. So where do we start? Unpack it for
Oh,
me.
I think you started really well. I mean, failure is definitely synonym of something so negative. When we fail, we feel like we didn't succeed. But I think more importantly is linked to blame, and I think that for me is where everything kind of like starts to spiral out of control. I want to start with maybe a couple of three quotes that when I've been doing my research about failure, it got my attention. So, the only man who never makes a mistake is the man who never does anything, by Theodore Roosevelt. That for me is a synonym of if we live, we try new things, and we have to be ready to make mistakes, and obviously make mistakes is synonym of failing. So that really struck core. Another one, a little bit more practical. I've missed more than 9,000 shots in my career. I've lost almost 300 games. 26 times I've been trusted to take the game winning shot and I missed. I've failed over and over and over again in my life. And that is how I or why I succeed. And that was Michael Jordan.
Yeah.
So somebody who obviously we see as someone who wins and succeeds and is very famous. And look, it took many failures in his career to succeed. And the third one is I'm sure you have heard about this one. I've seen it quite a lot of time. I have not failed. I've just found 10,000 ways that won't work. And that was Thomas Edison. So I think that puts into context where we are with
Mm.
failure. I think the people who are resilient and understand how to succeed accept and understands failure. I think the problem I have is, or we have in the world, is that we have grow up in a very competitive, very a life where failing is not accepted anymore. Um, I know when you were a child, for example, you were tested many times in your exams, and your parents and probably failing wasn't an option, and failing become a blame. You didn't put enough work, you didn't study, you spent too much, in your game. So the child grow up really seeing failure as something that is bad, and blame. If I fail, I have to, it's very, 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 I suppose, ingrained in our culture. So how do we move towards a place where we are, I would say, blame is not the way we see failure, something that probably is more uh, something from where we grow from.
Mm.
So that's where I think we should be, talking about failure today.
So it's much more about kind of an educational perspective, isn't it,
Mhm.
really? Because in order to learn, we're inevitably going to make mistakes because we're not born suddenly knowing about rocket science or something like that. So failure seems to be part of the the learning process. I guess where it comes into play with sort of negativity is going on to the point you're making about exams. I think particularly where we work together, it is a very high achieving environment. We have a lot of high achievers, and so failure is often hard for people to deal with. And particularly saying about the exam sort of side of things, by the time you come to an exam, there's an expectation that you're going to have a certain level and knowledge, and then with some parents, if you don't get your A's, then it's a failure, right? So I guess there's something about when are we ready, and when is failure acceptable or not acceptable? Because I'd imagine if you're a brain surgeon, failure isn't an option, right?
Yeah, definitely. I think
timing.
failure, when we talk about failure, is not about accepting failure as it's going to happen. I mean, I generally believe that it's more about the fear to fail or the fear of not succeed more than accepting failure. So I think what I would like today is to talk more about that link between how we approach failure, how we talk about failure and the fear, and how we will put ourselves, our well-being in danger, so we stop failing. But I totally agree. I mean, the more so in some circumstances, failing it shouldn't be accepted. I mean, will you jump from a plane if you think the parachute will fail? Obviously not. But the question is, what have you put in place, and because it's so important not to fail, what controls have you put in place to make sure that failure doesn't happen? So as an organization, you need to understand when failure can't happen and when failure is allowed. So when we talk about failure, then we need to make sure that the organization understands where they can fail. So we need to make sure that when it is critical that an organization doesn't fail, we put all the controls in place there to be able to succeed. So there are many measures of succeed. You have efficiency, safety, for example, is one that you don't compromise, because if your organization wants to be successful, you can't suddenly compromise on efficiency. So, but then you have another side of where failure may be allowed when it's about innovation. So when it's in a controlled environment, when you want to take the risk. But the main thing for me is how do you approach failing from the onset. I mean, you don't go into a project thinking you're gonna fail. I mean, you think you're gonna succeed. You get married thinking you're gonna succeed. You're not thinking, oh, I'm gonna get divorced in a couple of years. But I suppose the more ambiguous and the more risky and the more obviously there are more risks to fail. So I think we just need to think about these moments, and as an organization really understand where do I need to put the effort to stop failings, and how do I accept failings. I think my concern is people are, like I said at the beginning, fear to fail, then they put themselves to the point of burnout. And this how an organization can create a culture where people put boundaries, so they are succeeding or they're failing, but in a safe environment.
So how would one go about doing that? Because I think you're absolutely right. Certainly people I coach, often they have a real fear of failing, of upon how they're going to look as an individual, and therefore people aren't going to trust them in the future, that sort of thing. And that can have a really bad negative impact upon people's well-being, in terms of the way they see themselves, and long-term in terms of energy and ability to do their job. So how do you tackle things from a mindset point of view, and putting those safety measures in place like you're referring to?
I mean, personally, any individual can work in their approach to failure. So first of all, work on your own resilience. Definitely as an individual, resilient people are those that accept failing and really bounce back very quickly. They just literally are very positive. I do see a resilient person very positive. They just literally know that if something goes wrong, they just accept it, lessons learned, and they just carry on, bounce back. So really working on that mindset of how they approach. I think as an individual, work on your passion as well. I think sometimes is the passion to work, the passion to what you do. You love so much what you do that you will not accept failure. So in our case, as you know, in Cambridge University Preston Assessment, the learners, the commitment towards the learners sometimes overstretched. So we're so passionate. It's documented. People who are on service of others, doctors, nurses, they will put their well-being will be not a priority. Delivering and not failing will be above and beyond. The problem is when you are on burnout, then you end up not be able to be productive or delivering anyway. So you're gonna fail anyway if you put. So that's how you need to see it. So personally, I think definitely you can work a lot, but I think in these scenarios, it's not about the person's. It's not a person's problem. It's the culture of the organization.
Yeah.
So I think if a leader or the organization looks at failure as a blame, we talk a bit about that blame. So all the failure is blameworthy, and no failure is ever accepted. Then there would be a culture where people would be very afraid of failing, and again that fear. The Harvard Business Review, they did a few surveys, and they asked leaders how many of those failures in their organization they think are blameworthy. So there actually was somebody to blame for a mistake. Maybe somebody didn't follow the process, something that the failing could be specifically linked to someone's not following a process or not doing something, or you can find that blame. And they mentioned that maybe 5% of the failures. And then the second question was how all of your faults you treat them as blames, and they say 90%. So the problem is we put all the failures into the same bucket of somebody's to blame. We can't afford to fail. And we should be more about, okay, which one genuinely are someone was to blame, and we need to reduce. And we're talking about safety, efficiency, that type of failures. Then we say, well, we really can't afford to fail here. But all the other failures, probably 90% of your failings, are where you can grow, where you can really gain from those failings. And I think if you start really instigating a conversation around that, people will feel safer, because the people will be able to speak about failing. So we obviously in behavioral programs, you talk about creating that psychologically safe environment where we can speak up. Now, speaking of failure, I think is very important. And I do believe if we worry less about failing, if we fear less about failing, then we will be more productive. So the likelihood of failing is going to be less, because we're going to be focusing on delivering, and we're going to be improving all the time. So I think that is a space for both the individual to work in their mindset and their approach, looking at their own motivation for succeed. But there is also that leader that encourage boundaries, so work-life balance. If you have a team that is overstretching and put their well-being at risk just because we succeed or we need to succeed, is it worth the risk? That's my question. Is it worth the risk of sacrificing your people so you succeed? And that's a risky strategy.
So it's definitely something there about risk management, and also us not being a lone entity. So even if it's about our own personal management, recognizing that what's around us affects us, those that we surround ourselves with, or things that have influenced our mindset, have an impact. It makes me think of, in most recent times, there's been a lot more openness now about people sharing about mental health. I know it's still taboo in many places, but it's certainly something that is discussed a lot more. And personally, I think that's a positive thing. Before, when people are fearful of admitting that, or not discussing it, it creates a sense of being alone. So, but in order to share, we need to ensure that we're able to share with people we can trust, and that we foster that sort of culture of non-judgmentalism, or of not rebuking people or seeing it as a failure. So I think there's something about recognizing that we all fail, or rather, we're not all perfect, is probably the better way to describe it.
Yeah, yeah, we all have. I don't like to say weaknesses. I like to say vulnerabilities. We're all vulnerable. We're all human beings, and we're not just in a continuous line. We have peaks, we have lows, we have moments where we're really, in a good mindset, very productive. But if we're going through a bad stretch, or a bad, illness, or a bereavement, maybe our performance will drop. And that's, I think, as a manager, as a people manager, as a leader, it's about identifying those as part of the plan of the program. So again, for me, when failure is life and death, I mean, will you, if you're the one responsible to checking the parachute, will you come to your shift hangover and tired? Or, hang on, my job is life and death. I'm gonna make sure I am well. I am on top of, I'm gonna have enough resources. I'm not rushing my job, because the outcome of my job is life and death. So that's where the organizations really need to put the resources. But if it's about innovation, if it's about whether we're allowed to fail. But the main thing is, in the journey to succeed, we shouldn't put the well-being of our people at risk, because I think that's a very risky strategy, especially if failing is life and death. Or if failing is, when we're talking, obviously safety is quite obvious, but if it's reputational damage, if we fail, we're gonna damage our reputation, or we're gonna have a loss of revenue that is gonna maybe put our business at risk of survival. Then I think not looking at the well-being of people on that journey is a very risky strategy, because people who are tired, people who are exhausted, they will make mistakes. They will, obviously, the productivity peak is going to drop. So instead of being able to deliver 100% than they expect, it might be at 30 or 40%. So I think it's about understanding where failing is acceptable. And again, you talk about risk management and that, but yeah, and again, going back to that, are we open to accept that if we fail is something that happens? Because like that quote at the beginning, we have to make mistakes. If no, we're not succeeding. The other thing is, are we stretching ourselves as organization? I mean, if we in a comfortable space, we know the process, this is where we will never make mistakes, we will never fail. But maybe that is synonym of we're not stretching ourselves to do better. So there is I suppose a business case to accept failure, to be able to progress, to be innovative. We have to accept that we will fail, but we have to do it in a safe environment, and in a way where we can learn from it, and we can.
So there's something there, isn't there? A failure being part of that growth. And what I'd be interested to get your thoughts on is how you manage, let's see, how one manages changing or moving from that mindset of such a fear of failure. A lot of people I coach, not simply just in our organization, but externally and others as well, are real driven perfectionists, and they want it the best, and often, as I said, very high achievers, and they're used to doing it such a way. But then any deviation of that is really, really hard to deal with. How do you go about changing a mindset that would enable you to at least be, to a certain level, okay with failure and embracing it from the perspective of growth, which is, I think, what you're indicating?
I think the first thing to do is accept that failure will make you feel bad. I think if you fail, you're not gonna suddenly be ecstatic and be happy. So I think acknowledging those emotions, saying, well, I will be very angry if I fail, and this is how I'm gonna. So enter into a space of acceptance first. Learn your coping mechanisms so you don't lose the perspective, I suppose, of what happened, because it's very easy to catastrophize a failure. So instead of just understanding that maybe it was only a smaller, more acceptable failure, but if we get angry, we just lose control over that failure. We might catastrophize, we might not see the positive things, so maybe there were some small wins. So I think the first thing is accept, and we will feel bad. There will be some bad emotions coming from failing, especially where, like you say, high performance, high committed. The other one is maybe reframe failure. So to feedback. So reframe, we didn't fail, we just didn't achieve the standards that we were expecting. It's not necessarily we fail. Again, going to that catastrophizing. So reframe failure as feedback. So you start looking at that lessons learned. See the positive, like I did say, that resilient person normally is very positive. Okay, we didn't achieve this time, but look how much we learn in the process. Maybe during the process, some vulnerabilities and some weaknesses in the process were highlighted. Maybe so the good thing is that we do it again, we're going to do it better, and we're going to get out the other side stronger and learning, and we're going to do it better. I mean, there is Elon Musk just blowing up chips now. He literally invests millions, and he knows that one successful trip to Mars is going to take maybe 3 or 4 very or even more unsuccessful. So it's about celebrating that small wins. Not everything fail. So really look back, and so acknowledge your feelings and your emotions. Then you're gonna feel bad. Reframe it so it is a more positive, and celebrate those small wins. And the other thing is and I think that the whole delivery is changing to doing more. If failing is going to be really bad, but don't try to deliver everything in one go. Try to iterate, the agile approach to delivery, so you can then change direction, so the failure is more manageable. So you fail little, then you can change direction. So I think that the best thing you can do as a high achiever is don't get disappointed. Don't think this is the end of the world, and I'm sure. However, we have to remember not all failures are good. We have to manage the bad failures, the ones that are going to destroy us. Really, they're going to the end of the organization or the end of a life. Those need high risk management. But the other ones, and I feel that they're 90% that are burning us out. They're the ones that we can accept. They're the ones that we can't. I mean, how many times have you seen an organization's end of year reporting failures? You never. You always see the end of year of an organization, how many, we did so great. It was a brilliant year. You never see, oh, by the way, we never got it right here and here and here, but this is what we learned from it. And I would love an end of year report saying, we never got it 100% right here. I think that will shift the organization culture on accepting a failure, and it will increase risk taking and be more innovative. I think it will be so good for any organization who's bold enough to say, we don't always get it right 100% all the time.
So that leads me on as one of the things you said a couple of times now is about the importance of resilience. And I'd imagine that's not only in terms of individual, but in terms of an organization as well. How would you go about establishing resilience? What does that look like? What is the process of that?
I think this is when we need to make sure that it is a cultural level. This is not a few webinars and we put a few yoga so people become resilient. So if you want to be resilient, just make sure you practice yoga and you practice mindfulness. I think being resilient, it generally needs to be a cultural level, and it needs to be that direction that the leader do accept that things not always going to be 100%. But it's very clear when 100% is needed, then it's a spell out. But then enough resources are put in it to deliver it. Because if it's that important, then we need to really have enough resources to deliver it. If it's not that important and we are 100%, then it is okay to fail. And I think to become really resilient, we need to do the homework first. We need to really look where we're failing, where is more likely we're going to fail, and what will be the impact of it. So a very strong business continuity, risk management, all that, I think it needs to be invested. But for me, organizational resilience come at cultural level. It's not just a few initiatives and a few courses that we do here, or the policy. It's not enough to say we are resilient. It's prove it in the day-to-day, in the email that the team received when the project didn't succeed. What did that email read? Oh, it was very disappointed to see that we didn't get 100% certificates going out. Or we noticed that we didn't get what happened, but I'm sure next year or look, we have been improving in the last 5 years. We started with 80% failure. Now we're only on 5% failure. Well done, team. So I think to become a real resilient organization, you have to really show it, not in your words, in how you act, and then become embedded in your culture.
So showing it in the terms of the way that you accept or celebrate failure, as long as it's not end of the world kind of failure.
Yeah.
And how would I go about that as an individual? So let's say someone's been listening to this podcast, hopefully been listening to this podcast, and they've acknowledged what you're saying and say, do you know what, you're absolutely right, Maria. I could see I'm too much of a perfectionist, or I've been too harsh on myself. I need to accept failure more, but I'm really struggling about this. You talk about resilience. What do I do? How do I become resilient? I'm on my own. This isn't in a work context. It's about me in my everyday life. Maria, what would I do? What would you tell that person?
Oh, that's a difficult one because I'm not an expert. This is just a subject that interests me. I would say the first thing is do a bit of reflection, really. First of all, what is the impact on your life of being the way you are? I think a bit of kind of like self-coaching could go a long way. Ask the questions. Okay, what is important to me? Is it more important that I deliver this 100%? But what about work-life balance? What am I sacrificing to stop failure? So I suppose self-coaching would be the first approach. Do ask yourself those important questions. What is important to me? Why I'm the way I am? Why I'm working the way? What do I gain from being from reaching 100% all the time? So I think the first approach would be that self-reflection. But I don't think this is something that people can do on their own. I think talking to others, I would be very surprised if they start exploring with other colleagues that maybe are in the same project. What is impacting them as well? And I think reaching to others will be important. And it's not something that's just going to click. It's not a switch. They say that takes a lot of tries before habits change. And the other one is to start to put boundaries around what and how you work. I think is, like I said before, passion, commitment, responsibility. I was one of those. I love my job a lot, and if I could work 24 hours, I will work. I'm so committed to it. But I have been in burnout phase, so I deliver 100%. And I know that. So I'm now more conscious about my limitations, my vulnerabilities. I learned from that experience. So I put more boundaries around. But I think you can work a lot and you can be very productive if you change your mindset to it. So if you feel less fear, less worry. So I think that's the biggest change personally I've done, is that I worry less if I don't deliver. So I'm delivering, but I'm aware that I can't deliver everything. It's just too much. So my approach to it is I will do my best, and I will prioritize, and I will change my priorities, and I will work very long hours. But I don't feel I'm burning out because my worry and my fear or my concerns are very, very low. So it's a weird mindset where I feel like my to-do list is huge, that probably I'm failing, and I'm not delivering to the expectations of everybody. But it's good for me. I'm appreciating what I'm doing, and I'm saying this is as much as you're gonna get. So my fear, my worriness, and that has helped me balance a little bit. So you can do a lot of hours, and you can put a lot of work, but you need to balance it with your mindset, I think.
And I guess that's the resilience factor, isn't it? It's looking after yourself, being kind to yourself. And I think too, there's something there about no person is an island. You're not on your own, and there's only to a certain extent you can do everything alone. I myself has experienced burnout, and one of the things I experienced from that is being out of control and actually needing the help of other people. So I think that's really, really important. So of course, that's what affects culture, having culture around you, whether it's in an organization or indeed in the outside of work context. Is looking who you surround yourself with. Are there healthy relationships? Are there people that are actually feeding into you, or are they endorsing or amplifying or concreting all the negative things you were thinking about? Because that's not going to help you. That's not going to build resilience. That's just going to drag you down all the more.
I think any project or any delivery at organization level should really ask, can we deliver without putting our people at risk? And that's the problem. We want to always get better. We want this great organization. We want to impact more. We want more revenue. We want more efficiency. But we never really stopped and said, are we sacrificing the well-being of our people to deliver this great organization? And I think that's where we need to really get back and say, hang on, this is not acceptable. If we end up in a situation where a project is really late, it's going to be very expensive, the first solution would be, let's do it at all cost. Let's just get on with it. Okay, I'm so sorry, you're going to have to cancel your holidays, and you're going to have to work overtime. And nobody really stops and say, okay, what happens if we don't deliver? What happens if we just say, sorry, we're going to be 3 months late? Or we're going to say, nobody really stops that, because the desire to succeed is always above and beyond that. Hang on, we can't. Why you're going to stop going on your holiday to deliver this? Why this is more important than your well-being? And I think that's and then the people are so, like you say, they're all very passionate, very committed, or fear to say, hang on, my well-being is more important. You're on your own. We protect our colleagues, so we say, well, I can't leave, because then that means my colleagues are going to be delivering it while I'm on holiday. So it's just a spiral out of control. So I think any project needs to say, what is the worst that can happen if we don't deliver? Now, if it's life and death, then the solution is no, and your well-being is, okay, what what other support we need to make sure that we deliver it without you burning out.
Yeah.
What is it? It might be that I need you for the next 2 weeks, but hey, you're gonna have 2 weeks off after, or there has to be a conversation around it.
Thank you, Maria. So one of the things that does actually come to mind as well is, as you know, I'm involved with a mentoring charity that works with people of colour, and I think both of you and myself have been involved in the EDIB space at work. And often we hear things about pressure that people feel about representation. Often I've had friends say to me that from day one, being told you're going to have to work doubly as hard because of your skin colour, because people are going to make judgments of you. That creates a huge sense of pressure, because then it's, well, if I fail, I'm representing a whole group of people. Any thoughts about that? Certainly from your experience from the EDIB perspective. I know you're not from the UK originally, and I know we've discussed about that before, and there's some issues perhaps there you could touch on, but unpack for me what your thoughts are.
Yeah, I think this is like you said, double important to talk about when failing is not an option, because then your characteristic is going to be their reason why you fail, so it brings to my mind when I was reading the latest book of Michelle Obama. She has an extract on her book when she told the story about, I can't remember the name of but it was one of her friends who was studying law in Harvard, and it was in the 60s. It was very, very early time on the Black history, and working for their rights. And this individual started getting involved in protests towards rights for Black people, but that means then she abandoned her studies. And again, she started to say, well, they're now saying I'm giving them now the reason that I'm failing because I'm Black, not because I didn't have the time to study, because I was involved in the protest. So it become like a reason why I can't fail. I just can't fail, because then they're gonna find the reason, for the excuse why Black people shouldn't be studying, or Black. So again, in the organization, is very important, and EDIB and all the programs of inclusion looks at how we make sure that when we approach failure, we don't make this a reason for people who are vulnerable or a minority to be the reason why they're not succeeding. So again, failure is, is an organizational failure. It's not an individual failure. Going back to that, is not a blame. Failing is not about finding blame. It's finding lessons learned at organizational level. What can we do better? Instead of turning into an individual blame, somebody didn't do enough work, or somebody didn't. So I think it's very important that we look at the EDIB aspect of failure, because there are definitely still work to do, where unfortunately for some groups, failing is still not an option, because they're still fighting for their rights. So as an organization, we definitely can make a more level ground to, and I think it's just the approach to failing, the approach that is praiseworthy, not blameworthy. That's
Yeah, I think there's something really powerful that. I mean, I'm mindful of being a white heterosexual male, that many of the issues concerned across a whole group of people won't be my own personal lived experience. But then that's why it's so important to be mindful of things like unconscious bias, and being consciously inclusive, so that doesn't plays a minimum result in how we treat people in terms of what is deemed to be failure or not. Because if you're operating from a space of prejudice, then that's going to affect how you see an individual's failure in compared to someone else's. Well, it's a learning experience. So how we view people, I think, is absolutely bang on the money. So is that anything you've had personal experience from from your background and as a woman?
I think all in health and safety, definitely. There was I've been doing health and safety for 20 years now, and I started my career in manufacturing and construction. So I was very aware of the perception of a woman doing a health and safety inspection in a construction site. So again, failure, it was like, if I do a bad job, then I'm I suppose amplifying the stereotypic that women can't do the job of being able to just put their hard boots. When I started health and safety, there wasn't personal protective equipment for women. It was very difficult to find boots for construction in a size 5. It was all very different 20 years ago, and women in health and safety has worked towards that equal rights, that we can go into construction sites. And I remember being in construction sites where there were not toilets for women because there was no women. So it was so yeah, I think the whole I need to do a good job, because if not, the stereotypic of women can't hack the construction site, it was there at the beginning of my career. But I'm pleased to say things definitely have changed a lot. The women definitely have a more fairer play. The Colombian and the accent and all that, definitely sometimes it creeps up, but I think we definitely have become a better world, more inclusive, more better. Still work needs to be done. And unfortunately, some people still have the pressure of the failure is not an option for them. And I think as an organization, we can work, like you say, with a good EDIB program, being a genuine inclusive organization where everybody is treated equally. Failing is not linked to the individual. So that, it's important that we speak about all this.
It is very important. And look, thank you for all the work that you do. You do a great job, and all the different pies you've got fingers in. And thank you for bringing your insight today. You may not be an expert, as you said, but you certainly provide some really good insight. So I thank you for contributing today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Mark.